Hello fellers, how are you doing? First things first, I lied to you. Not all the aspects I'm going to cover are retcons and, most probably, I won't discuss about all of them because I'll leave something behind by mistake. Basically, the point of the video is to show each one of these critical points of RDR2 and see if they're really a problem or not. Let's start.
How well do you know New Austin?
I don't. We talked about coming down here many times, but never made it.
Who's we?
Me and the folks I used to work with. Yeah, New Austin. The last real outlaw country, where the old ways still hold true.
So, this one is pretty famous. Now, I have to make a premise. John isn't a reliable narrator. He's been thrown by the feds on a mission he didn't want to participate to. He knows his family is in danger and taken hostage. He doesn't know much people there, and the few ones he knows have become deranged criminals. It's understandable he doesn't want to talk about his past to a semi-unknown person, even if she seems reliable and friendly. Making clear he doesn't know the area is a way to protect his identity in case he went there years before, being it with the gang or not. If you think about it, he had a similar attitude in the epilogue, being elusive about his past but also giving some information. I don't consider this a retcon because John could have probably been lying, and, even if he didn't, in the second game it's never told anywhere that the gang reached New Austin, and John got near Armadillo just once during the story, so he might not even have realized he was in another state. Next one.
And at what point during your day of hunting down outlaws do you find time to raise chickens?
Only been at it 3 years or so. I guess I'm kind of new to it.
You're telling me? So who's looking after this farm of yours right now?
Uncle. Well, he's not my uncle, as far as I know. Just an old dog who's as lazy as a lizard on a hot day.
There's not much to say about this one. Considering John started his farm in 1907 and he got blackmailed in 1911, the timing fits pretty well, especially considering he wasn't even so sure about how much years had passed. He says 3 years or so after all.
What is this place we're headed?
Tumbleweed? A lonely, god-forsaken place. Some people say it's haunted. It was quite a town back in its day. Then they built the railroad.
Now things start getting complicated. On one side John seems not to know New Austin, but on the other one there are a lot of side missions and encounters that happen during or after the epilogue if you go in those places. The simplest way to justify it is that those events are outside from the story and, consequently, not canon. And I could agree with that, but it's also true these events have some kind of relevance. I mean, if they weren't canonical, that means John never met Sheriff Freeman, he never wiped out the Del Lobos from Thieves' Landing, and many other things you can do in the second game. I stick with the idea that John could have visited those places and he's simply lying about it to keep a low profile, or he could even have forgotten them. I mean, the last time he could have canonically went to Tumbleweed is right in 1907, and it also makes more sense since during epilogue his family abandoned him and he needed money. It wouldn't feel right if he kept adventuring after getting the Blackwater money and settling down after all. This one is very interesting because the developers seem to have put an Easter egg regarding it in the second game. You can see Abigail knitting a small shirt. She also says to John that he'll see what's the purpose of that shirt, possibly meaning she knows she's pregnant or wants another baby. John's daughter could have born also between Chapter 6 and Epilogue, but I find it unlikely since the Marstons had much more problems to care about during those times and probably didn't even think about another baby. The most likely scenario is that she was born after 1907 and died before 1911. But then, why isn't there any grave? Well, that's a problem from RDR1. The real issue, though, is this thing Javier says.
I hope you and your wife and children rot in hell.
You know that life we lived is over.
To be honest, Javier could just have assumed that John had other children aside Jack. To corroborate this, there's also the fact he pronounces that menace almost as a way to curse John's family as a whole and, most importantly, neither Dutch nor Bill mention the daughter, suggesting they don't know about her. It's still weird to see that RDR2 didn't reserve any space for a character that had a big impact on John's life. I mean, losing a daughter is always horrible, even if we assume she died during her birth. I wouldn't call this a retcon, but it's definitively an aspect that should have been treated with much more respect and attention. Tumbleweed's situation is pretty much explained during RDR2. The railroad mess had a big impact on it, so I don't find so weird it became a ghost town after 4 years. Armadillo has that background story about the strange man and his curse, but other than that there's nothing suggesting it was recovering from a plague in the first game, apart Drew briefly mentioning cholera. If I have to be honest, though, it can still be acceptable since the town had about 4 years to become normal again. The fact that Johnson and his deputies are missing bothers me the most, especially considering how much this character was appreciated and also that he has been the marshal since 1897. Ultimately, while I can understand Tumbleweed's situation and find it plausible, Armadillo seems very undeveloped and purposely left to rotten because they had to rush with the release of the game. If you think about it, Arthur should have visited those places and talked with the sick people there, so it's quite safe to assume that Armadillo was probably decayed in 1899 and should have become similar to the first game's version in 1907. Here we have the first retcon. This is simply totally wrong. Bonnie states she's 27 years old, meaning she would have been 14 in 1898, when Red Dead Online takes place. Tell me what you want, but this is not how a 14-year-old looks like, even if she lived in the Wild West. There's no excuse for this. Another retcon, this is simply not right. Bonnie states the barn was built when she was a little girl, so way before 1899. What bothers me the most is that this could have easily been fixed with an update, but the devs didn't care about it.
They'd all gone crazy anyhow. Our old leader, fella you probably heard of. Anyway, he more or less lost his mind, went and shot a bunch of people unfair like.
It could be literally anything: the Blackwater Massacre, Cornwall's murder, Bronte's kidnapping, Gray's genocide, and much more. Now Kachine is perhaps the stupidest retcon in the game. In RDR1 it's evident it was once a mine or something similar and Dutch simply took it as his shelter. At most he built the wooden structures surrounding the mountain, but there's no way he would have created those large caves and even put lamps there. It's obvious that the place is an abandoned structure made by some company. And, keeping that in mind, what do we have in RDR2? Literally nothing. There's not even the cave, there's no one there. Quite the same could be said about Thieves' Landing. It's at least twice as big in RDR1 and it seems like a very old town, while in Red Dead 2 it's no more than a hideout for misfits. Javier is pure contradiction. His change in behavior is totally unjustified and unexplained, but that's material for another video. Moreover, there's almost no way he could have known about John's farm, unless somehow Bill heard of it somewhere and told him.
You don't have the heart to kill me! Come on, go back to your farm, John!
The only aspect I could overlook is Abigail saying he was a creep, cause it may be just a random insult told by John to mock him. Arthur, Hosea, Charles, Sadie, Micah, all of them weren't designed back then, so there's not much to say. In their defense, their absence isn't so weird. John had really no need to talk about Arthur or Hosea because Johnny was very reserved about his previous life. I feel the only one he would have told something more is Ricketts, maybe by mentioning how much Arthur helped him, but, again, it isn't necessary. As regards Charles and Sadie, they moved in different countries and, at least Charles kept a low profile. It's entirely possible that Sadie's dead by 1911 considering how careless she became. However, it's worth mentioning that Charles was indeed recognized as part of the Van der Linde gang, but if you think about it, Ross targeted ex-members that were actively harming people, and killing John was probably just the cherry on top to complete the homework for Nate Johns. If you thought blocking bridges in Red Dead 1 to prevent you from going to Mexico early was a stupid patch to justify a narrative choice, RDR2 does worse. Gil knows this bridge exists, but when they go there, well, it doesn't exist. No one says nothing, there's no explanation. The last points are all connected, and they're probably the trickiest ones to deal with, since the community of the first game itself misinterpreted what the game said. There are three main events described in Red Dead Redemption 1. The Blackwater Massacre, the robbery where Dutch killed Heidi McCourt, and the botched 1906 robbery. The Blackwater Massacre wasn't a ferry robbery yet. In the Blackwater Ledger we get to know it happened in 1899 and Ricketts was a survivor. Many people mixed it up with the strange man's statement about McCourt and the 1906 robbery, even though ever since Red Dead 1 it was confirmed that the massacre took place in 1899. The ferry robbery mentioned by the strange man could have originally been the one where John was left behind, since he points out it's the same one he got shot.
Do you remember Hattie McCourt's face? Who? She was a girl Dutch Van der Linde shot in the head on that raid on the ferry a few years back. Same one you got shot on.
Honestly, though, I think this is a very far-fetched proof. By the tone of the voice, the man seems to casually say it like just an expression, but even considering it to be a hint about the link between this robbery and the one that ended the gang, it's only a hint and it can't be used as a proof to demonstrate a retcon. The 1906 robbery is mentioned in a newspaper, stating Dutch was rumored to have died in a fire after a bungled robbery that year. There's no mention of the gang, so he could have done that all alone or, most likely, with his new gang we see in 1911. There's a quite big retcon here, though, because for some reason, at the beginning of the game Dutch is not believed to be alive, but in Red Dead 2 there are articles from 1907 talking about him and his criminal activities. So, to recap, these three events, probably due to their vague description, were merged before Red Dead 2 came out, and people believe John was left after a botched bank/ferry robbery in 1906. Now we know that, despite probably intended to be two different things at first, the ferry robbery and the Blackwater Massacre are the same thing, while the bungled robbery in 1906 is just some regular mess Dutch did during those years. Red Dead Redemption 2 doesn't retcon these events, even though there's an inconsistency between what the newspapers said about Dutch's survival after it. And to finally conclude this video, I'll share my personal opinion about all of this. Red Dead Redemption 2, just like anything, is far from perfect, but I tend to be indulgent when talking about retcons, because I've seen how difficult it is to write a cohesive story and don't mess up a bit. Many people could disagree with me, and I understand that, because it's also true that Rockstar is a huge company and it wouldn't have costed nothing at least to add the missing constructions to the map with a patch. Moreover, the general lack of interest in making the whole epilogue as well written as the rest of the story, which I underlined in previous videos, also reflects on these aspects. Red Dead Redemption 2 is a fabulous game and a mostly good prequel, surely better than many other prequels, but it could have been much, much better.